met in person. You don't know me except for some like exchanged tweets we've had, right?
Right.
So, I have never owned any festive regalia my entire life. Okay. For whatever reason, about a month ago, I'm 54 now. I think it's maybe a middle-age menopause thing. I suddenly became seized with this idea that I needed to own Christmas sweaters and Christmas vests. So I went on this website, this app Poshmark that you can buy like, and I've purchased no less than 6, mostly sweater vests. This is the sweater, but then I have several vests.
This is amazing.
Yeah.
Wait, do you have holiday earrings on as well?
I do. Now this was the only thing I owned before. These were my mother-in-law's, and when she died a few years ago in 2016, I took them, and this was the only concession I would make to the holidays before. But now I've gone full sweater and sweater vest.
It's gorgeous, and I am delighted that your foray into holiday wear has coincided with our first face-to-face meeting. This makes me so happy.
This is my debut Christmas outfit, like with you.
I love it.
So on to the reason we're really here, Mary Laura, and that is, of course, one of the things I said we didn't. I said we don't know each other in real life. We don't, but I have fallen in love with you on the page, which is one of my favorite things about being a reader. My book club is called Wild Reads, and the premise is that I share with my club books that I love wildly, and books that take us on wild journeys, and books that take us to those wildly interesting places within. And your book does all that. I'm going to show people this beautiful book. Oh, did you
look at the sticker?
It says, can you see it? It says,
it's wonderful. I've always wanted a little shiny sticker that says,
okay, well, I'm going to ask Literati to send you one. I didn't know you didn't get the sticker. I did think it was a little sad they put it on this wonderful turtle.
They made the right choice. I go over to my neighborhood bookstore, Parnassus Books, to sign books all the time, and they put a little signed sticker on, and everyone has agreed that's the place to put it, is right on the little turtle butt. There's kind of nowhere else to put it that doesn't cover up words or that would cover up his face.
You're right. It isn't. It's like a little addendum to the rump.
Good choice.
The thing I want to hear about the cover and this turtle in a minute. But the first question I always really love to ask authors I interview after we've established their wardrobe proclivities is tell us the genesis story of this book. How did you begin writing it? Why? How was this book born?
I love that question. I love that question. And just to back up for a second, I love what you said earlier. The fact that you fell in love with my words on a page makes me so happy and makes me feel so honored, because I've been in love with your words on the pages for so long. And this it makes me so happy. Bomb Shelter, there probably would have been a book.
Did I call your book Bombshell? I might have.
If you did, it went right over my head.
Well, it's just that you're such a bombshell.
in my Santa hat.
Bombshell earlier. Back up. Roll the tape. Okay. Bomb Shelter.
Shelter. There probably would have been a book very similar to Bomb Shelter at this point in my life, because at the time I was beginning to write some of the things that made their way into the book. I was writing a lot about sort of this phase of life, this early middle age, where it like hits you that you cannot deny using the term middle age anymore. We are middle aged, and we're in this.
How old is that for you? I know people, it's different for different people. When did you think you were in early middle age?
I'm 48 now. And around the time I was like 43, 44, I started doing the math and going, am I going to make it to 88? I mean, it would be lovely if I did, but I'm getting close to where you really cannot deny that you're at least at the middle of life, unless science really goes wild with the longevity treatments. So kind of mid 40s was when I was like, this is middle age.
That's early. I felt the same way.
And it's also like it's the time when like these things that come under your eyes, they stop going away after a good night's sleep. And stuff was happening. I was like, okay, I'm middle-aged. My little baby children had become these big, tall teenage people, and my parents were getting older. And so I was kind of reckoning with this feeling of, man, sometimes just when you feel like you've got steady footing and you finally got everything under control, everything starts to slide out and destabilize. I was starting to write about that stuff. And then something happened in our family that kind of made that instability feeling blow up even greater, which is that my son, who at the time was in high school, had his first epileptic seizure. And it was the kind of thing where no one saw it coming. It happened in the dark of night. We found him on the floor, chaotic 911 call, day in the hospital kind of thing. One of those days that's like the before and after.
Yeah.
Nothing will ever be the same. And everything that happened before in my memory, it's like it happened on a different planet.
Right.
So that experience and the mental and emotional territory that I moved into afterward as a mom and as a human being and as a natural kind of worrier who just, I've always sort of felt like if I just worry about everybody enough, I'll be able to keep them safe. That all went into overdrive. And so that ended up kind of dovetailing with what I had been writing about. And this book got a narrative thread to pull all those things I'd been thinking about, to pull them along. And as I followed that thread, these memories from earlier in my life started bubbling up. So the reason it's called Bomb Shelter, I'm not going to spoil it for anybody, is
neither will I.
There's a literal, actual bomb shelter in my family's past that probably wouldn't have been in this book until I started thinking along these lines. So that's why the book is called Bomb Shelter. But that's kind of where I was generally, and then what happened that really sparked this version of that book.
I think that the title is so perfect, not only because there is an actual bomb shelter in the book. We won't spoil, like, readers who haven't read the book yet will just come to it when they will. But really, the book, I think, is so much about how essentially, unless you decide to live your life in a bomb shelter, which none of us can really do, you are going to put yourself at risk. Something's gonna hurt. You're gonna have to feel afraid. And I love, there are all of these ways in these chapters. And I should say to those of you out there who haven't yet read the book, it's a memoir. I think it's probably considered a memoir in essays. Each chapter tells its own discrete story, and yet they're all threaded together. I read it very much as a memoir. Is that how you think of it, or do you think?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I had a whole long nerdy series of conversations with my editor about how exactly it would be categorized.
Right.
My prior book was called I Miss You When I Blink, and it is an essay collection. You
Yeah.
could maybe call it a memoir in essays. But this, I felt like this is a memoir. It's built out of essays because that's what I know how to write, but it's a memoir.
Yeah. But I think, what I felt in you, first of all, I just feel such a sense of sisterhood and kinship with you because we have kids about the same age. We have my daughter is 17 and my son is 18. Your kids, how old are your kids now?
Right there. They are now, one's about to be 17, like this week. And then my son is 19, about to be 20. So we're just like right ahead of you.
Yeah.
Yep.
And one thing, I just related to you in so many ways about this interesting moment in your life. Not only, of course, did you have that health emergency with your son and his epilepsy, but also just the simple act of realizing that these babies who you have protected and nurtured, you've been their bomb shelter, or so you loved to think. And yet here they are walking around in the world and they're going to leave you. And you have to, I see you reckoning so beautifully and profoundly on the page with that really universal human experience of how do we bear essentially letting the people we love take all the risks they have to take.
Yeah. And it's like, once you start thinking about it in one context, like once I started really thinking about it in the context of my children, like, oh my God, they're going to leave and go out there and I cannot follow them and cover them in bubble wrap, all the way through life. It makes you start seeing everyone that way. Like I started thinking about my parents who have taken care of me. They're all, my whole life, thinking, how can I protect them? They're now at a phase of life where they need some extra loving care. What do I need to do to make sure they're safe? My friends, my neighbors, animals in the backyard. I mean, I really kind of did go into this overdrive protective mode, which is not a sustainable a sustainable thing. So that's what you see me going through. The book is kind of like, all right, how do we get back into a more stable gear? But for a while there, I was like, I've got to take care of everybody. What can I personally do to keep everyone and everything safe in the world? Which is nuts.
And I think that one of the most moving things to me about the book is, the answers you come to, which are essentially, that you can't, I was moved to tears several times in this book. I was moved to laughter as well, because you have a very kind of non-heavy-handed way of, I think, exploring some of these deep and profound questions. And as you say, not just about your kids. Your kids are central to the book, but really about your parents too. About the famous turtle of the. Is this the turtle actually?
That's the actual turtle, photographed by me.
This is Frank the turtle.
That is Frank. I took that picture.
Oh my gosh.
In May of the year before the book came out. So I guess May of last year. Time has lost all meaning. I don't know what year it is or what month it is right now. Thank you. We had a turtle model in his place on the cover, and we were desperately waiting for him to come out of brumation, which is like hibernation. And if he came out on time and I could get a good photo, we could use him on the cover. And if he didn't, we were going to have to go with the turtle model. And we got down to the weekend before the Monday, the cover had to be finalized. And I was out working in my yard, and Frank came walking out from under a bush. And I screamed to my children to bring out my camera, and I lay down on my stomach. If you go to my website, which is just MaryLauraPhilpott.com, scroll down, you can see a picture of me taking that picture of Frank.
I love it. And for those of you, those of you who have read the book will know that, Frank is a very important figure who we meet a couple of times throughout the narrative. But tell us about Frank, for those who are new to the book.
Frank lives in my backyard. I should say, first off, it's
Nashville, Tennessee.
Nashville, Tennessee. I live inside city limits, but if you were walking around my neighborhood, it sort of feels like out in the country. It's wooded and hilly and lots of creatures around. We've got donkeys down the street. We have foxes, all sorts of wildcats of various types, turtles, snakes. Frank is a turtle with very distinct markings who has been visiting our house. We think he lives somewhere in the backyard, but he visits our door, comes up to the back porch pretty frequently, not in the winter, but spring, summer, fall. And he's just, it's like he's a member of our family, but he's not our pet. We don't feed him. We don't bring him inside. But he's just become almost like this mascot for our family. Like he represents this place we live, and he represents this time in our lives that we all lived together in one house. And the reason he's on the cover, and I had to really kind of fight for that crazy cover, is, to me, he represents everything that humans don't have. Like, he's got a protective shell. He can just go inside and he's safe. We don't have that. We're these little squishy, breakable balloons, and we have to use our minds to come up with some idea of safety.
But see, that's okay. It's like we're at an editorial meeting. I'm going to argue with you about your own metaphor. Okay. What I was going to say is that like the reason to me that he's on the cover and that he's such a, in addition to just being like interesting and charming as a character, like it does seem like a wonderful metaphor. And this is what I like, this long way of asking the question I began asking like 5 minutes ago. But to me, a turtle is exactly what we are. Is that, we've all got that shell that we kind of can retreat into and believe, okay, we're going to be safe here. And yet you can't live that way. This Frank can't live unless he comes out of his shell and walks up and knocks on your door and wanders around your yard. And,
I love that.
Essentially exposes himself, makes himself vulnerable to danger. And that is also what we have to do. And the profound truths in this book that you write so beautifully are all that. Are all in my mind. This book is about you essentially learning how to kind of navigate that balance between like being in your shell and thinking you're safe and coming out and living your life.
Yeah.
And I'm curious about, I think that the magic and art of your book is that the balance of those two things. But it is through the most ordinary things that you, Mary Laura, write about extraordinary things. And I wondered if you could talk to us about that. I think that as a reader of both of your books, I think that that's a sort of a theme I see a lot, is that you are a writer who finds the extraordinary in ordinary life, and you tell us stories about those things. And I don't even know what my question is about this. Like, where does that come from? Like, what
Thank you.
place in you? Where do your stories come from?
Thank you. Thank you for saying that. I love that. It's, I write about the ordinary because I live a very ordinary life. I've never been kidnapped by pirates. I'm not an astronaut.
Damn.
You
Yeah.
know, I don't
You
have
have
that.
that to possibly look forward to.
I could, if I work really hard, I might be able to make it to space. But my existence is, compared to things like that, pretty small. I'm a writer. I live in the woods. I take care of my little animals and my people. It's a relatively ordinary existence. But I think all of us live emotionally and mentally in the realm of the extraordinary. I mean, we're all thinking about high stakes things all the time: life and death and love, and the fear that we have for our loved ones, and how the bigger you live, the more you are at risk. But that's not a reason to not live big and love more people and do more things. And I'm babbling now, but I love what you said. And as a reader, I have always loved books about ordinary lives, books that can spin extraordinary thoughts out of ordinary things.
Yeah.
I love to read that stuff. So I never believed what a lot of people say, which is you can't publish a memoir if you're not famous and you haven't done something crazy.
Yeah.
You can't publish a memoir if you're just a regular person. To me, that seems nuts, because I've read books by regular people and I love them. And what makes a book fun to read is when somebody, to me anyway, is when somebody gives you words for the static in your head, for the things you've kind of been thinking and feeling. And then someone goes, it's kind of like this. It's such a relief, and it's such a fun feeling too, to be like, yes, that's it. So I love to do that. I love to do that as a writer, and I love to experience that as a reader.
Yeah. And I mean, I think memoir is really, for sure, the most misunderstood literary form, because, there are memoirs that the premise is, I'm a really famous person and here's my life story, or the premise is I did something extraordinary. And essentially the memoir goes forward on this theme of that, like, really extraordinary thing, right? But the memoirs you and I write and love most are memoirs where it's all about writing the extraordinary into the ordinary.
I mean, tiny beautiful things. It's not big amazing world crashing things. It's tiny beautiful things. That's why everyone loves that book that you wrote, that has the beautiful 10th anniversary edition out right now.
Thank you.
That's why people love it.
But even with Wild, like, I always feel like I always say, I didn't write Wild because I took a hike. I wrote Wild because I'm a writer. Right. And really, I mean, I know I went on a long walk, but a lot of people have gone on long walks. And really, to me, like, what I was most interested in doing is that exact thing that you do in Bomb Shelter, where, you write deeply into those ordinary moments that end up being hugely universal. Tell us the story of, who we are. I'm wondering if you could tell me, I'm always just so interested in, the writer's craft and, like, the journey of writing the book. And I know readers are too. Would you tell us two stories? One, the hardest chapter of this book to write, and the other, the funnest or easiest chapter of this book to write. And I should say, I want to just pause, those of you out there watching us live, you can feel free to drop a question down below us, and the lovely people at Literati will put it, will send it to me so I can ask Mary Laura your questions as well. But I just bought you a couple seconds to think.
Thank you. Thank you. As you were asking the questions, my brain was like, oh, I know. Okay, I know exactly which ones those are. The hardest chapter to write, which also, it was the one that kind of just flowed right off my fingers, but at the same time, I took the longest time editing it and perfecting it. And that is the third chapter. It is the the one chapter that maybe needs a little bit of a trigger warning for parents everywhere. It's the one where we find my son on the floor. And it begins with my husband and me waking up at 4:00 in the morning to this noise that in my sleeping brain, I thought it was somebody ramming down our front door. And my husband got up to go investigate, and then I heard him start running. So I got up and started running, and we found the source of the sound was my teenage son, who is, a man-sized human on the bathroom floor having a seizure. So it was his body hitting the floor again and again and again. And that chapter where I described finding him and then everything that happens, it's only a few minutes of chronological time, but what often happens in those before and after moments is time kind of expands in your head. So you've got these memories coming in at high speed, and then your brain is also trying to sort of extrapolate into the future at high speed. What's going to happen if I do this? What's going to happen if I do this? I wanted to get that chapter exactly right for a number of reasons. One of which is that my son very graciously agreed to let me include a few moments from his life in this book. Most of his life is not in this book. He would have to write his own life story. I'm very protective of his privacy, but this is one of those moments he allowed me to put in the book, and he has no memory of it. So this chapter that I've put on paper, this is the official record of something that he doesn't remember. So I wanted to get it right for that reason, but also because that's the chapter where you understand why my head went into this turbo protective gear that it went into for the rest of the book. And if you can't see it and feel it and hear it and experience it the way I was feeling it, then the rest of it kind of doesn't make sense. So I really wanted to get it right. I spent a lot of time on that chapter. So that was probably the hardest in a lot of ways. The most fun, hands down, was the meditation chapter, where I have the dialogue between the guided meditation that I listen to and my actual brain. It was fun because it was a different form than I usually write. I don't write a lot of extended dialogue because I write memoirs, so most of it's in my head. It was really fun to write the back and forth between the lady's voice and my internal voice. And also it was just it's fun to me to write things that are just so obviously true. Every single time I try to meditate, this is what happens. Every single time. I have to use the guided meditation. I can't do it on my own. And the lady is like, okay, you are the rock in the stream. And my brain is like, remember that movie, Howard the Duck? It's like an invitation to my brain to just take the lint basket and dump it all out. So that one was fun. And the original draft of that chapter was twice as long. And I had to go through and cut it out because I was like, at a certain point, people don't need this much of this.
Exactly.
But it was fun.
Too much fun. But no, oh my gosh, there were so many chapters in this book where I was just like, okay, we're the same person. But really, I think inside, like my mind works so much like your mind works. But that is one of them.
I'm glad I'm not alone.
When my daughter was, I remember it was just so clear when my daughter was like 3 or 4. I remember there was some situation, we were in some kind of playground or some situation, and she was standing near this like painted line on the pavement. And I looked at her and said something like, now, the only rule is just don't cross over this line. And she immediately stepped over the line, which tells basically the whole story of my daughter. This remains very true to this day. But it's the same. Like I thought of that when I was reading about your meditation. The minute somebody says, "Now, empty your mind,
right.
Do not think of anything," it's just like
quiet your mind. It's like an invitation. Your mind's like, I got thoughts. You want to hear my crazy thoughts?
And see, all the people out there listening who are like really good at meditation, they're like, yeah, the two of you need it more than anyone. So we're supposed to keep working on it, but like, I don't know.
Is anybody good at it? I mean, isn't the whole thing like you're trying to do something that's kind of impossible? Quiet your mind. Are there people who maybe there are?
Yeah, no, let me just,
I don't know.
I mean, I'll just speak for both of us since in this regard, we do have the same mind. I think that there are a lot of people out there that are way better than us. And I think we're bad at it. We just are. But maybe that's okay. Like it takes all types, doesn't it? I mean, what I think like is like, well, if I'm not going to worry about it, who is? like somebody's got to kind of hold up,
Right. We're keeping the planes in the air with our minds because we are worrying about all the planes. That is what keeps them up there.
That's right.
That's how
That's
it
right.
works.
Okay, we've got that settled. So what about this book, like I said earlier, it is your story. It is you. And yet, one of the things I always say about memoir, it's the first question that people ask when I teach memoir. How do you write about other people? Because I'm worried my mom's going to be mad, or I'm worried I'm violating privacy, or these things. And I always say, the hardest thing about writing memoir is the unfortunate fact that other people exist. And
That's well put.
you know, because even though this is your story, your husband is in it, your parents are in it, your kids are in it, your friends, you write about friends. And I really loved the way you did it, which is that I never felt like you were concealing things. Like you said about your son, you were very careful not to tell his life story. But sometimes you can read memoir and you're like, oh my gosh, the writer's just,
Right.
I want to know more. I never
Yeah.
felt like I have to know more to make sense of this. And yet I always felt like you told us, but you also respected a lot of boundaries. Can you talk about your process in writing about others?
I'm so glad that I'm glad you felt that way. I'm glad you didn't feel like things were missing. I have a series of guardrails and boundary enforcers in my writing because I am just, and this goes, I think, hand in hand with that whole protective feeling that I have that the book is about. I'm very protective of the privacy of my loved ones. I'm even protective of the privacy of people I don't like. I mean, if they wanted to write their story, they could write their story. But I think that the main thing is being clear about what the book is about and what it's not about. I could write, and so could you, because we're good writers and we're funny. We could write books about all sorts of other people if we wanted to, but that's not what we're doing. We're writing stories about being human, and the ingredients we're using to tell the story of being human are things that happen to us. So if I can keep that focus on all the time, I find that it's really easy to filter out what's not needed. I don't need anecdotes about cute things my kids did when they were little. I don't need anecdotes about funny things from when my husband and I met if they're not relevant to this story I'm telling. This story I'm telling has an emotional plot. Once upon a time there was this woman and this thing happened and it threw her into a tailspin, and so she had to figure out what to do, and then here's the dark night of the soul, and then she figured it out. That, if anything that sticks to that, I just made this shape. I don't even know what that is. That story arc, that story worm that I just drew in the air. Anything relevant to that is a story I'm willing to tell. And if the stories that I'm willing to tell, the chapters and the scenes, do involve other people, then I get surgical about it. And I on a micro level, really look at every scene and go, okay, that person was there, but do they need to be included in this telling? Okay, that one doesn't. This one does. All right.
Yeah.
Well, now if I know this one does, what can I do? I also used that, a minute ago, I said, once upon a time, there was a woman. I have this once upon a time rule that I use when I'm editing my work. Once I've written a draft of a scene or a chapter or whatever, if it has other people in it, I put it away. I get it back out later. And when I read it, if I can describe what I've just read as once upon a time, there was a woman who, then I feel like I'm good and I've kept the perspective, like in my eyes and my ears. If I read it and I realize, oh boy, this whole scene is really once upon a time there was a boy who, or once upon a time there was a guy who, I've veered into telling someone else's story, then I've broken my rules. I've veered past my guardrails and I need to throw that draft away and start over.
Yeah. And of course, this question gets infinitely harder. I just want to say to those of you who are, I think it gets really hard when you have to write a story about, say, a parent who abused you, or like that somebody is, everyone you've written about, you love.
Yeah. And you're right. It's different for every story.
Yeah.
It's different for every book. It's different for every writer. Some stories have, I knew what the purpose of this story was. Some stories have a different purpose.
Yeah.
And it is a sticky thing that there's no like perfect answer that you can go, okay, her answer is my answer.
Right. So we have a question here. What are some of your favorite memoirs and what books are you reading now?
Oh my word. What are some? I'm sitting in my office right now and there's 3 shelves of memoirs. There are so many.
But
Well,
do you like, I want to ask first a sort of sub question of that. Before my first book came out, I realized that this was the one question, like I never prepare for my interviews. I just answer questions as they come. But one thing, it's kind of like the meditation thing. When they say, make your mind go blank, everything comes into my mind. But when people ask me like, what books do you love? Or it's as if I've never read a book. All the
yeah,
titles of all the books leave my head. I actually had
I've
to like make a list.
I've
So I
never heard of a book. Yeah, no, it happens
have you?
every single time.
Because we
Like,
love so many books, it's
right.
overwhelming.
Or even like, what are you reading right now? I might have been just reading an hour ago and I'm like, I'm not reading anything.
I have no
Um,
idea.
you know what? I'll tell you one that kind of answers both questions because I've spent a lot of time with this book this fall. It has become one of my favorite memoirs and it's also like newly out so people can go read it. I reviewed Rob Delaney's new
Oh,
memoir,
yeah.
A Heart That Works, for the New York Times. And I wanted to do right by that book because I felt like the book is about his experience as a person and a dad going through the death of his 2-year-old. His 2-year-old son Henry died after having a brain tumor. So I wanted to do right by the book for that reason. It's about something really important. And also I felt like there was a review to be written that just treated it like a celebrity memoir. Like, oh, look, the funny guy went through something hard. There's a way to write the review that doesn't treat it as a work of literature, and I wanted to treat it as what it is. It is a piece of literature. It was crafted really artfully. He put so much. You can tell he put so much work into
Yeah.
the way this story was told and the way the story is constructed. I think it has such wide appeal. I think everyone should read it. It's about being a human being. It's actually in some ways similar to Bomb Shelter and to Tiny Beautiful Things because love is the linchpin that holds it all together. So I read it multiple times, took notes on it, really spent a great deal of time with that book. So that's probably my answer that gets to both questions.
That's a beautiful book. That's a
And
beautiful book.
short. It's great for, if you're in short attention span holiday season. It is a short book, but it'll stay with you. You think about it for a long time.
Yes. What about you and your next book? Are you writing have you ever written fiction? Have you always been an essayist and memoirist?
I've always been an essayist and memoirist. And before I was an essayist and memoirist in my own voice, I was a ghostwriter. So I've always written about true things. But at some point, I've been writing a lot of little stuff. I've had a lot of book reviews and articles and that sort of stuff this year. That's what I've been working on. I'm trying to decide whether I need to go live a little and then come back and write some more memoir, or is it time to venture into doing something I haven't done before? I'm like right on the brink of that right now.
Trying to figure out that next. Well,
Yeah.
what about Frank? Like what's our fabulous turtle up to?
As far as I know, he's out there in the backyard under the leaves,
Okay.
brumating/hibernating. I will tell you the paperback edition of Bomb Shelter is going to have a slightly different cover. Same color family. It's really bright and splashy. It's beautiful. You can see it from space. But I had, I'm reaching over into my office. Hold on. For anybody who ends up later buying the paperback and it's like, oh, I'm so sad I didn't get the turtle. I had stickers made. So you can still get
when
the
does
turtle
paperback
experience.
come out?
April. It's a ways off.
Okay. And so you can get a turtle sticker. How will people get turtle stickers? They have to come to your events?
You could come to my events. I'll probably take a whole roll of these over to my local bookstore, Parnassus Books in Nashville. So if you order from there, I'll make sure they have stickers. They'll throw them in the package, or
I
just
love Parnassus.
send me an email through my website. I'll send you a turtle.
And if you get everyone gets a turtle.
Everyone gets a turtle.
That's more. So one of the things I wanted to ask you about as well, that it just like, I mean, I know it's really all the world is contained in this book, but it's, I mean, all the story you tell is all there between the pages of this book. But since I asked how Frank is doing, and I also asked how are your parents doing? You wrote very movingly, we didn't get to touch on this as much about being, here's my dog, Zazu, about being,
Hello.
in the sandwich generation. I wanted to spend a little tiny bit of time that we have left to talk a bit about that. You mentioned really passingly, like, that role that, I mean, I don't have that. My parents,
Right.
I don't have that experience, but I know so many people in middle age have to shift from daughter or son who has been taken care of to daughter and son who have to take care of their parents.
Yeah.
And how is that?
It is really something. It's, and I feel so fortunate that my husband and I both have our parents still with us. I know a lot of people don't. A lot of people, get to middle age and don't have their parents around anymore. So it's one of those things that's it's chaos, but it's fortunate chaos.
Uh-huh.
It's so funny the timing of the way it hits, I guess, depending on if you have children and when you have children, like you, I've got these children who are just sort of venturing into adulthood. And then we have these older adults who are in certain ways becoming more childlike in that we're having to get more involved in their care. And it's just nothing really prepares you for that. It's so interesting how many times in life you imagine that there's a finish line of some sort. Like,
Yeah.
okay, if we can just get to this, everything will be stable. And then you get there and it's like, ta-da, here comes something else. And that's the sandwich generation moment is full of those false finish lines.
Yeah. I mean, I think I remember really distinctly. So my kids are just 17 months apart. And so I had two babies under the age of 2. And I just remember like just loving them so desperately. I still love them as desperately, but when they're little, you're just like, how on earth, especially since I was a new mother and I didn't really know anything about babies until I had a baby, which is insane. But I think a lot of people have that.
I think a
experience.
lot of us do it that way.
I just remember thinking, like, how can I possibly keep them safe? And I made a deal. I don't believe in God, but like I just talked to the universe because I think
Same.
maybe somebody's out there who will
Same.
help me. And I was like, if they can just live until 5, like if I can just keep them alive until they're 5, let's please, universe. And then guess what, Mary Laura? When they turned 5, I wanted more.
Right. Man, I make those bargains all the time. I have so many deals going on with the universe, so many trades.
I think that the beautiful thing about that is this is what bomb shelter is about to me. That like as human as it is for us to think we can make bargains and beg and be good or worry or do things that will, keep the people we love safe, whether they be our children or our friends or our parents or our spouses. That it's very much the human story of that plight. And also very much the human story of, your own personal, I guess, the word triumph comes to mind because, but it's not quite right because I know it's ongoing forever, right? Inside of you, that feeling that, the grace of life is accepting that actually, we're vulnerable to it.
Yep.
To love and to live means to walk forward, not totally protected by that shell that's on our backs,
Yep. It's a
And
lesson I learn again and again.
Yeah, so much that it's a beautiful thing. And I just want to thank you for sharing your beautiful heart with us and your beautiful words in all these beautiful pages of this book.
Well,
My book club loved it, and I have loved being able to share it with my club and to share these words with you, Mary Laura. I hope our paths do cross in real life.
I really hope so. I'm so honored to have had this conversation. I'm so grateful to you. This has just been a joy.
Oh, thank you. A joy for me too. Now, happy holidays, as my wreath on my shirt announces. And I'm wishing you all the beauty ahead in 2023. You said you're like, maybe I need to go and like live more to get that next book idea. And then in the next breath with my next question, you're telling me about being in the sandwich generation and this journey with your parents.
Yeah, maybe that's it.
I don't know. I'm not your editor, but I'm just going to say, pay attention. I mean, I forgot to say that. I wanted to talk about that. One of the things I admire about your writing so much is I just love how carefully you pay attention to the world. and keep doing it.
Thank
Okay?
you. Thank you. You too.
Thank you. Lovely to talk to you. And thanks to all you who have listened to this live or who will listen to it long after we've recorded it and our clothes are no longer seasonally appropriate.